Honeybees are a foundation species. Without them, our food supply diminishes. And when bees die, the outcome reaches right inside everything that is on your plate when you sit down to eat. If bees can't or don't pollinate, then you don't eat as much, and neither do the other animals in the food chain. Colony collapse disorder is the term given to those hives that lose the majority of the worker bees, leaving behind a queen, plenty of food, but only a few nurse bees to care for the remaining immature bees. From 2007 through to 2013, more than 10 million bee colonies around the world were lost to colony collapse disorder. Now, there are several possible causes for CCD that include pesticides, infections, pathogens, changing climate and environments, and the introduction of neonicotinoids. And then there is the honey, nature's nectar, which in its pure, raw form is a delicious natural sweetener. The key to buying good honey, as you will hear, is to know your honeybee farmer. We invited beekeepers Amanda and Jeff Lee of Swan Valley Honey to join us for a conversation that matters about the intricate relationship we have with pollinators who ensure we can all enjoy a plentiful and delicious diet.
Conversations That Matter is a partner program of the Center for Dialogue at Simon Fraser University. The production of this program is made possible thanks to the following and viewers like you. Please become a patron at conversationsthatmatter.tv.
Amanda Goodman-Lee.
Thank you.
Jeff Lee.
Yes.
Welcome to Conversations That Matter.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Honeybees play an incredibly important role in our lives, and I think most people don't quite understand it. They think, oh, honey, but that's one part of it, and we'll get to that. But first of all, let's talk about why it's so important that we pay attention to the health and well-being of honeybees here in British Columbia.
You want to take that one?
The first thing I thought of is Mark Winston, who wrote the book Bee Time, and it was a very popular book. You didn't have to be a beekeeper to appreciate it. Coined the phrase, I don't know if he came up with it, that honeybees are like the canary in the coal mine. Mm-hmm. And as honeybees are dying off, it's really showing an overall effect of what our environment is going through. There are so many different things that are happening, not just with pesticides and farming practices and monocrops, meaning the planting of everything, but also climate change. And we as beekeepers are really feeling that with the farmers, where you would have your bees ready for May to go out into pollination for cherries or apples. And in Creston Valley, where we're from, they always had the Blossom Festival in end of May. Well, now Blossom Festival seems to be happening early May. Mm-hmm. And so we're having these winters that are very short. And then we go from one season last year in 2018, we went to 30-degree weather in 1 week in May, and all the blossoms exploded, and the farmers were calling us up to get our bees into the field.
So can bees be that adaptive to changes in weather?
Well, we're not really sure. I mean, science is out on this one. This is an evolutionary cycle, and evolution, as we know, takes a long period of time. So the question is, can a foundation species like honeybees or even the native pollinators, the bumblebees and the mason bees and the sweat bees, can they actually adapt to these kinds of changes that are taking place? Presumably, yes. I mean, if it's slow enough, all animals can adapt to certain things. They either adapt or they die. The thing with honeybees that I think, we get a lot of people saying, are the bees dying out? And what we try and explain to people is that bees are your foundation species. Without their ability to pollinate flowers, you don't have a lot of different foods. And that's not just foods for humans. It's food for the entire environment, whether it's the other animals that live off of the berries that are created through this pollination.
Or the crops that are grown just to feed livestock.
Absolutely.
Yes,
and
absolutely.
so when we came into this business at a time when bees were under enormous stress. When we first started beekeeping, the term colony collapse disorder was it was a new phrase, but it was something that caught on fire immediately. And nowadays everybody says, are you suffering from colony collapse? And the problem is that it's not a very well adapted phrase for what's going on today with bees. The bees are, I'll give you an analogy. We have a pest in our hives that all beekeepers have. It's called a varroa mite. It's a very, very small mite that feeds on the fat cells of honeybees. Now, if you were a honeybee, it'd be about the size of a dinner plate on your back. Okay, so you can imagine the size of it, right? Well, as beekeepers, we try and manage those mites by getting them off the bees. We use organic compounds or whatever, but think of it this way. We are trying to take care of a bug that is living on a bug. It is that finite a problem. So when you talk about what's the long-term prospects for bees in general, we have a lot of problems on our hands.
So I'm going to get you to hang on for a second while we take a quick commercial break. We'll be right back. Conversations That Matter is brought to you by Odlum Brown, a client-focused investment firm that starts client relationships with straightforward conversations focused on you, your aspirations, and your investment priorities. Odlum Brown has been a supporter of Conversations That Matter from the day we started this show. Their only condition was that we provide a non-biased conversation with people from all sides of all sorts of issues. And of course, we couldn't produce this show without the support of Oh Boy Productions. If you're looking to produce a show like this one, I suggest you reach out to Oh Boy. They can help you produce it, and they can help you build your audience. And we also need your support. I ask you to please pledge $1 per show by going to conversationsthatmatter.tv/donate, because those dollars add up and play an important role in helping us produce this show. Now, back to the show. Okay, so what's the state of the honeybee sector? I wanted to say industry, but it really is a sector because it's more than just an industry. It's a part of a lifestyle. It's
Well, there's a lot to it because, like bees, and to Jeff's point, it's 30% of our food production is from honeybees, or not from honeybees, from pollinators, not just honeybees. So without it, just to put it in perspective, if you had a beautiful breakfast laid out for you with some oatmeal and toast and butter and jam and all of these different things and
coffee,
fruit and coffee, and you didn't have the pollinators, well, there goes your coffee. And then if you like a little chocolate with maybe your croissant, there's the chocolate's gone.
Well,
and
everybody love chocolate with
and your
croissant.
jam and your fruit. So you would have a very brown plate. Like brown food. It would just be like there wouldn't be any
no
colors.
color.
So there'd be no color, there'd be no taste. So I forget where I was going with this point. I had a really good one.
But the whole point of it.
Well, I was thinking of the chocolate. No chocolate.
Oh yeah, well that's actually a shame in our
Brain
family.
freeze.
That's right.
Here's the reality. When you say, about the health of honeybees, as beekeepers, we have the ability worldwide to actually replace honeybees. If we lose our bees, and in our case, we did lose a lot of our bees this last winter, how we got back into business is that we opened up our wallet and we shelled out a lot of money and we bought some bees that came in from Australia, and we're back in business because Apis mellifera, which is the bee, the honeybee, is you can find it anywhere in the world now. It's transported everywhere. The bees that I think that we are really in trouble with are native pollinators, are the ones that don't have the champions of the beekeepers who then go out and buy more bees or breed more bees. They're your honeybees, your bumblebees, they're your sweat bees, your miner bees, your mason bees, any of the native natural insects that live out there, which are under the same kind of assault that our honeybees are under, are the ones that are not easily replaceable. And in British Columbia, for example, we have 450 species of native pollinators, of native bees. And already we're seeing the severe decline of certain of those species simply because farmers happen to be spreading their fields right to the edge, and they try and take out with pesticides or herbicides all of what they consider to be competing vegetation. If you were to leave some of that competing vegetation, what happens is the bees get an additional source of proteins from the pollens. They get an additional source of nectar, which is their carbohydrates, and you end up having stronger populations. Now, in the case of honeybees, and rather in the case of bumblebees and sweat bees and minor bees and things like that, they live in places like the ground, or they live in reeds. So when we...
So they don't hive the way that honeybees do?
No, absolutely not. As a matter of fact, honeybees are the only managed bee that we have in the world where we actually produce honey and we keep in a box for
because
the
they can
production.
be domesticated in a way.
I mean,
or herded anyways.
bumblebees can be. I mean, like you look at a lot of the pollination that now takes place inside of greenhouses, for example, tomatoes. They're a domesticated bumblebee, but they're not a honey producer. And they, at the end of the year,
And they live kind of in that environment of the greenhouse.
And
Yes.
they're a solitary bee as well. They don't live in a colony, where honeybees live in a colony.
and they're a community
So
related bee.
is that a strength for honeybees, but is it also a potential threat? Because if they bring in some kind of, agent or disease, then the whole colony is at risk.
Well, here's the sad part, is that as a society, we know a huge amount about honeybees because we've worked with them, we produce from them, we breed them, and all those things. But when it comes to say any of those native pollinators, it takes a scientist to be that involved to know the knowledge about. So do we know whether or not, for example, that the varroamite doesn't jump to a bumblebee? I'm not sure. Do we know that Nosema ceranae, which is a new form of a protozoan disease that's come in from Asia, it affects our bees? But do we know whether or not it affects the native pollinators?
And
we
do you
don't
have
know.
a treatment for it?
No. As a matter
You
of
don't
fact,
have a treatment.
No, for things like for Nosema, there's very little that we can do. There's things that we can try, but it's again that issue of trying to take care of a small pest living on top of a big insect.
Yeah.
So the idea is that you can miss it by a little bit and you'll kill everything.
Wow.
And so as much as I love, and Amanda, we both love raising bees and producing honey, I think that the basic fear that we and many beekeepers have is that as a society, we're on that very, 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 very sharp edge. We can very easily go one way and lose control and lose the population of the various bees that support us.
So one of the things that we have to take into consideration, of course, is you talked about pesticides, farmers using pesticides. Well, they must have an impact on your bees when you take your bees out to pollinate. How do you work then with the agricultural community to ensure that your bees aren't being devastated by the pesticides that they want to use to control against insects?
It's very hard. It comes down to a lot of communication.
There's a tremendous need to be connected, and
it has to be like a radius. So if you're looking at this and your hives are on this farm here, and these are all little, like if we use these little pegs and use them all as farms, the bees still fly in that radius. If the hives are here, they're going to all these different farms.
Are there not new pesticides that have come along? What are they called? Neonicotinoids?
Well, in our case,
Yeah.
in 2015, that pesticide that killed our bees was a neonicotinoid. And the short answer to that is that because they improperly applied the label regulations on it, the federal government came along and removed that pesticide from their use for all strawberry growers in Canada. The end result was that one farmer's mistake, which we never recovered.
But it cost you your hives.
It cost us our hives. We were never reimbursed for it, but it also cost every other strawberry grower in the province, and actually ultimately in Canada, the access to one neonicotinoid, which was at one point useful to them.
Yeah, just mismanaged. And I think that also brings up another point when I was talking to this farmer who's very helpful to us. So if I've got questions, I can always go to him and ask him different things. Is that he said, the problem is that things aren't regulated. We used to have someone who lived in this area, or for farmers that you could go to, and they would come out and they would see, do you really need to spray? What's the threshold of the pesticide that they're concerned about for their apples or their cherries, or in the Lower Mainland, blueberries, raspberries? and they don't have that anymore. Everybody's stretched really thin. It's a challenge. And the government, in agriculture, like farming is really, we're farmers.
Yes, you are.
And we work with farmers, and we all, at the end of the day, want to pay our bills and have food on the table, right? Like it comes down to an economics. So it would be helpful to have someone that the farmers could go to and say, do I really need to spend X number of dollars to get rid of this pest? But I'm told this is time of the year, I've got to do it.
Right.
But maybe that they don't need to spray.
Okay, I want to switch to the other side of your business. So yes, you rent your bees out to pollinate, but the product that they produce is one that many of us love to consume. And we don't really know what we're looking for. Honey is an interesting...
The happy side of bees.
Well,
yes.
Well, there's the honey and then there's the wax part. But I'm most interested in the honey because I love to consume honey. But I want to make sure that I'm consuming a good honey. How do I know? How do I know what is a good honey versus one that you go, I'm not even sure what's in it?
Amanda and I have this saying that is in defense of all beekeepers and also in defense of all customers, which is know your beekeeper. Okay, so I'm not going to sit here and tell you don't buy X brand or don't buy this over here or this box store honey or whatever.
Well, you know there are people who say you're a little too careful around that, but that's
I know,
okay. I understand.
But my point is the first thing is
okay, I won't be careful around that. Listen.
So the first thing to do, if you really want to know, is to go find out who is the beekeeper, or who is the company, where is this honey coming from. Generally speaking, Canadian honey has a very high level of confidence. There's
when it comes from a beekeeper and it's local?
Yes.
Is that really what it comes down to? Because are there not health benefits, when I'm consuming honey from bees that live in the same environment that I live in? Do I not get extra health benefits?
Sure you
as a result
do. I mean,
of
like you're getting the local pollens and things like that. But there's two different things you have to consider when you're saying, how do I know this is a good honey? One is if it's a local honey and it's a raw honey, in other words, it's not been pasteurized. And let's get this clear. Pasteurized honey is not making it safer. It's not killing any bacteria because there aren't bacteria in honey. Pasteurization is what packers do. They raise the temperature of the honey to high enough so that it kills all of the sugar crystals in it, so it doesn't crystallize. Because having it on a store shelf means that they have to then, the storekeeper calls you up and says, hey, Jeff, I've got 2 cases of your honey and it's crystallized. Would you mind exchanging it? The answer is I don't want to have to do that.
Well, yeah, but I find that when I have that honey, I actually have to take less of it because it's sweeter.
As a small scale beekeeper, we don't care whether our honey crystallizes. We want it to be natural. As a matter of fact, the way we treat our honey...
That's the pectin and the...
It's fructose versus fructose.
Glucose, higher crystallization.
Right.
Oh, yeah.
So
I quite like
the
it.
glucose, because it's glucose, fructose, sucrose in honey. And it gets very confusing. And I'm sure if I got the fructose or the glucose wrong, that a beekeeper's going to call me up and go, actually, Amanda, it's this. I get them mixed up myself.
Now when I see that, I go, oh, that's good honey.
Right.
Yeah,
so
and
crystallized honey is
real.
not. It's a good sign.
Yeah.
Some people don't like it. Large packers, large companies that have huge supply lines and all kinds of issues, they don't like to have to deal with that because they don't.
Well, they sold that image of it. It just
right.
Okay.
And so the first thing is is buy yourself a nice local raw honey. You'll get to know what it is you like. Now, the flip side, which is where we're really going with this conversation that matters, is
did not have to pause.
Is adulteration. Is adulteration, because that's what we don't want. And in Canada, there isn't a history of beekeepers putting things into their honey to stretch it out. Now,
is the operative word there not a history of beekeepers doing that?
No, actually,
but are there others that
it's
do?
Other companies that so for example, and I'm not telling tales out of school when I say that there is a history of honey adulteration that came out of China. Now, there are other countries that now do this, and what they do is they, and often the target of that adulteration is commercial operations where they use a lot of honey and they need to stretch it out. So you have it adulterated with rice syrup.
But here's the thing:
or corn syrup,
or corn
right?
syrup,
syrup.
or other things.
But I think what's happening is honey is a seasonal product. Okay? It doesn't, so we don't produce honey all year round. And it's amazing to me that people will come and they'll say, I never thought of it. I said, they can only take it from the nectar from plants, from flowers. So if it's dry and we have a drought in August, the nectar flow is not happening. You have to have some rain, you have to have moisture to produce that nectar. An experience we had this summer was that we took our hives up to fireweed, up into the mountains. Fireweed for
Skunk
days.
2 years in a row.
Beautiful, beautiful.
Skunked, totally.
Like
Didn't get any.
no honey from that, because it was so cold at night that nectar wasn't getting up into the flower. And I'm learning more about forage because of having honeybees. So you can see flowers, you can see it, but if it's too cold, the nectar doesn't flow. If it, so there's all these layers. So people think that there's this tap because when they go to the store, there's always honey on the shelf. But we do sell out of our honey.
Yeah. And so if you want good honey, make sure that you stock up the way that I did. I just bought
That's
7
right.
tubs of your stuff.
That's right, you do. And we have people, honestly, we've got one customer, he comes, it's like they know when we first start our extraction. And in July, when we start the first harvest from the spring honey. And I will have days where the driveway is just going. People are bringing up their pails and refilling right from our farm gate. It's really wonderful.
That's at the local level, and that happens to beekeepers all over the country. The message I think I want to leave with you around adulteration is that adulteration is actually a very serious problem. It's because of the cost, the real true cost of honey, because of how difficult it is to get it, and it's a seasonal basis, there is a natural predilection for some people to then adulterate it, add stuff to it, stretch it out.
Yeah.
And in the United States, the United States cottoned onto this quite a while ago, and they would stop a lot of Chinese shipments coming in and test them, and discovered that they're actually not meeting the definition of honey. In British Columbia, there is a movement that has now taken place, and it's largely because of people like Peter Orem over at Worker Bee, where they brought in, they went to the expense of the purchase of a nuclear magnetic resonance machine, and they now test and fingerprint honeys.
Good.
So you can tell whether or not that honey that you've got in the bottle is really true honey, or whether it happens to have high C3 or high C4 sugars, and it's been cut with syrup. And so I think, unfortunately, the way our industry is going to defend the value of honey is to have our honeys fingerprinted by NMR. And in our case, we did that. We had Peter look at us.
Or as a consumer, as you said, know your
beekeeper.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I mean, reputation, and in my other life that I had, my reputation was all that I had to trade on, and it was really important to me. And today, as beekeepers, our reputations are all we have, and it's what we have to trade on.
Wow. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Fantastic
Thanks.
conversation. Thanks,
Thank you
Jeff.
very much.
Thanks.